In tonight's story, we dive into the unraveling of a woman who crossed a line she once swore was untouchable. This isn't merely a tale of seduction, it's about the weight of silence, the ache of restraint, and the instant when desire collides with fear. It's about choosing exposure over safety, standing bare in body, mind, and spirit. A fair warning: this is a story for those ready to confront what it means to surrender. Celine Hart never imagined she'd be here, unraveling in ways she thought impossible. If someone had told her the night before that she'd break a vow she'd carried like armor, she would have laughed it off. Yet all it took was a glance that lingered too long, a heartbeat that echoed too loud, and suddenly the rules she built her life upon dissolved like dust in her hands. What happened didn't crash in like a storm. It slipped in quietly, like a knot finally untying after years of strain. She wasn't afraid anymore. She was ready. The house around her held its breath, the air unnaturally still, save for the lazy hum of a ceiling fan casting shifting shadows across the wooden floor. It felt as though the walls themselves sensed something irreversible drawing near. Earlier that evening, she'd caught him watching her, not with words or smiles, but with eyes that carried the weight of truths unsaid. Adrian Vale's gaze had lingered too long, trembling with hesitation, with pride, with the terrifying knowledge that once they named this thing between them, it could never be caged again. This tension had not bloomed overnight. It had been simmering for years, hidden in the way his fingers brushed hers when passing a mug, in the laughter that lingered too deeply, in porch swings where they sat too close and silence felt heavier than speech. Every moment whispered of something unnamed, a language only their glances spoke. That night, Celine stepped out of her bedroom with no hesitation left to cling to. No excuses, no turning back, just bare skin and bare truth. The hallway light was dim, a single lamp painting shadows along the walls like silent witnesses. At the far end, Adrian stood frozen. When his eyes met hers, she saw the exact second their carefully constructed rules dissolved into nothing. His gaze traveled over her, not with lust alone, but with reverence, like he was staring at both his salvation and his undoing. He moved toward her slowly, each step deliberate, until her back pressed against the cool wall. The air thickened, the silence louder than words. His hands hovered inches away, held back by invisible threads of caution and history, trembling on the edge of decision. She could almost hear the storm inside him. Touch her, or walk away. Speak the truth, or continue pretending. But Celine had already stepped over the edge. There was no return. Adrian leaned in, his breath unsteady against hers, close enough to bridge the space, but still holding on to that impossible sliver of restraint. And then, when she thought she knew what would happen, he whispered something unexpected, something that split the silence more sharply than any kiss could. Words she wasn't ready for. Words that would change everything. But before we reach that moment, let me ask you, what do you think he said? And if you were Celine, would you have chosen to press forward or retreat before the point of no return? Leave your thoughts below. Because trust me, what happens next rewrites their story forever. My name is Celine Hart, and I'm 38, living in a quiet coastal town in Maine. I moved here 5 years ago, trying to stitch myself back together after a brutal divorce. My life is small, simple, freelance editing by day, quiet walks along the harbor by dusk, the occasional book club that never really fills the void. And then there's Adrian Vale, 32, a carpenter with hands rough from work and a guarded smile that always felt like it hid too much. We met 3 years ago when he repaired the railing on my porch. From that moment, something unspoken settled between us. Coffee on my porch under the stars. Walks to the corner store that lingered longer than they should. Texts that meant nothing and everything all at once. We were never just friends, but we were never lovers either. Always almost, always hovering at the edge of honesty. Until that night, when the silence between us became unbearable, swollen with confessions unsaid, desires restrained, and truths buried too deep. Adrian's face that evening was a storm of longing and fear. His hand lifted toward my cheek, trembling, then faltered, falling before it could close the distance. His eyes told me everything. He wasn't just afraid of what came next. He was afraid of why he wanted it so badly, of what it might destroy in both of us. Was it me he feared? Or the part of himself he couldn't hold back any longer? And there, against the cold wall, I realized some lines, once crossed, can never be retraced. His presence was fire in the space between us, close enough to burn, yet still no touch, no words. The silence pressed heavy, unbearable, until the sharp buzz of his phone shattered it. One vibration, slicing clean through the tension. He froze. For a second, I thought he'd ignore it, but his eyes betrayed him. He was choosing between me and whatever ghost lived inside that screen. Slowly, Rowan Hale pulled the phone from his pocket. One glance, and everything shifted. His body stiffened, his jaw set like stone, and the warmth in his gaze dimmed into something colder, heavier. When he finally looked back at me, it wasn't desire I saw, it was burden. "I didn't want you to find out this way," he murmured, voice rough with apology. "Find out what?" The words clawed out of me, sharper than I intended. This wasn't about timing anymore. This was about secrets, the kind that rot in the dark until they're dragged, screaming, into the light. My pulse thudded in dread. Rowan's hand twitched like he wanted to reach for me but couldn't. Not because he didn't want to, but because touching me now meant confessing everything. And then he whispered, "That call, it was her. She's back." Her, the woman who had broken him years ago. He never spoke her name in full, only fragments, as though saying it aloud would give her power again. And now she had returned, her shadow stretching between us like a wall. Suddenly, I wasn't the only one stripped bare in that hallway. Rowan was exposed too, haunted by a past he hadn't let go. I steadied my voice, though it shook inside me. "So what now? Do you run back to what shattered you, or do you stay here and face what this is?" The silence stretched thick as a noose. Then he stepped forward, his hand cupping my face at last. Steady, certain, real. His voice came low, unwavering. "I don't want the past. I want you." It should have felt like a fairy tale. But it didn't, because before I could even breathe in relief, his phone buzzed again. He looked down, and the color drained from his face. "It's her," he said. "She's downstairs." I braced myself for the inevitable, for him to run, to chase the ghost of a woman who had once broken him, leaving me exposed and abandoned. But instead, Rowan did something I never expected. He powered down his phone, set it firmly on the table, and turned back to me with eyes full of resolve. "I don't owe the past anything," he whispered, "but I owe you the truth." He leaned forward, his forehead resting against mine. "No rush, no fireworks, just this, just us, just truth." And in that fragile closeness, I realized we weren't at the end of something. We were at the beginning. Over the days that followed, Rowan began to unravel the story he had locked away. Her name was Marin, his ex-fiancée. She had left him 4 years earlier, chasing a different life, vanishing without explanation. And now she was back in town, insisting she had changed, pressing to rekindle what she had abandoned. Rowan confessed he had ignored her calls for weeks, unsure if he could even trust himself not to slip back into old wounds. But that night, with me, he made a choice. Not just to stay, but to let go. We didn't fall into some whirlwind romance. It wasn't that kind of story. Instead, we built something deliberate, careful. Evenings on my porch turned into long conversations about fear and hope, the scars of old loves, the doubts that gnawed at us both. I told him about my divorce, how it left me hollow, wondering if I would ever be enough again. He told me how Marin's leaving had carved deep cracks in his worth. We weren't trying to fix each other. We were simply listening, truly seeing one another for the first time. One night beneath the stars, a bottle of wine between us, Rowan reached for my hand. Not grand, not dramatic, just simple, his fingers threading through mine. "I can't promise perfection," he said softly, "but I'm here, and I'm choosing this. Us." I squeezed his hand, my heart steady for the first time in years. That's enough. It wasn't a movie ending, no sweeping violins, no dramatic kisses in the rain. It was quieter, truer. Two people choosing honesty over ghosts, presence over fear. And maybe that's what love really is. Not lightning bolts, but small, terrifying choices. Like shutting off a phone when the past comes knocking. Like stepping forward when every instinct screams to run. So tell me, if you were in my place, would you trust Rowan after everything? Would you risk it, knowing the past was still out there, waiting? And do you think we'll survive Marin's return, or will her shadow unravel what we've begun? Sometimes, The most seductive part of a love story isn't what happens behind closed doors, it's what happens when you dare to open them.